Bringing to that committee, for myself, skills as a curator and as an academic, working across those two fields. My own work centred in new ways of thinking about both heritage and futures, bringing together stakeholders from museums and heritage organisations, policymakers, industry and the government. I'm currently Senior Research Fellow at the VNA, visiting Professor at Imperial, but I've just started a new role as Director of the Ruskin Museum and Cross-Disciplinary Research Centre at Lancaster University. This is a research centre in Lancaster, in landscape and the environment, and so very germane to the thinking we have today. I'm going to briefly introduce my panel members, although we planned this in a way that each of them is going to introduce themselves at more length through 10-minute provocations for debate, using methods for anticipatory practices in each of their own disciplines, and government health warning in advance. We've selected our speakers from radically different disciplines. So starting here with Linda Woodhead, who's Professor of Sociology of Religion in the Department of Politics, Philosophy and Religion at Lancaster University, and Director of the Institute for Social Futures. The Institute did a panel session yesterday, and there's been a lot of a buzz around the kind of the work that's going on at that institute. Linda studies change in religion, values, and beliefs. Next, Professor Sean Hendy is Professor of Physics at the University of Auckland and Director of a research centre focused on the study of complex systems and networks. And last but not least, Jana and I have worked together at the VNA, is now fast-moving landscape in our worlds, course director of the Curating Contemporary Design MA at Kingston University. She's a critic and international curator of headline shows at the VNA and elsewhere, and one of the editors of Design and Culture. Now, the very notion of the Anthropocene is a construct of the causal effects of humankind on its own sources of flourishing and survival. Thus, we would argue, anticipation in that context is anticipation of humankind's own flourishing or extinction, issues around environmental protection and human-centered existential threats. We want to start, as I said, by grounding the debate in the methods for anticipation in these very different fields, and we don't like to then open up to the floor for discussion across interrelationships, actions, values, interpretations, reifications between people in different contexts and cultures and the environment. So we're going to start with Linda. You see what an implied panel I have. Starting with the way you proceed.
Okay. I will start here. Thank you to the organisers for putting together such a wonderful future-facing interdisciplinary feat. Thank you to Sandra for bringing the three of us together. I want to look at anticipation around the Anthropocene, the way we approach the knowledge that humanity is bumping up against planetary limits. And I want to do so in terms of three culturally widespread and historically persistent general modes of anticipation, which I think are still at play here, whether we recognise that or not. My first one is apocalyptic, and it probably won't surprise you that I picked one of this as one that is still extraordinarily influential today in our thinking now and anticipating. It's really the most grandiose of the modes of anticipation. Apocalyptic draws a sharp contrast between the anticipated future, shimmering and perfect, and the imperfect and degraded era we still inhabit and which is getting worse. The future is where the gaze of the apocalyptic is fixed. Everything else is, if you like, pre-future, which must be overcome. Apocalyptic is temporal dualism. The idea of a new age, and of course there's a religious movement that calls itself that and shares the thinking. The idea of a new age just over the horizon is ubiquitous today. We're promised that economic growth will continue, longevity will increase, cancer will be cured, and robots will do all dirty work. The bad stuff will be a thing of the past. We see into this future. Our universities shape themselves to deliver it. Literally, apocalyptic means a tearing away, apo, of a covering, calypto. In the books of Daniel, Ezekiel, Revelation, and the Bible, the seer is caught up to heaven to behold a blueprint of the world. That's which to come, the New Jerusalem. Apocalyptic makes most sense in the context of those kind of religions and where you think of time as a linear progression from a creation start to an end. It's found, though, in Asian cultures too, where with their cyclical understanding of time. It's less found in Hinduism, but it's even there in some aspects. The end of the Kali age, the god Vishnu will come riding on a white horse to draw this time of degeneration to a close. One of the most destructive apocalyptic movements of all time, the Taiping Rebellion, took place in China under the mixed influence of Confucian and Christian thought. It resulted, as you probably know, in about 20 million deaths. Here in England, our own civil war was pretty bloody and was fueled by and fueled an enormous outpouring of apocalyptic, as Christopher Hill's wonderfully titled World Turned Upside Down still shows us so well. But none of this is exclusive to religion. Communism and fascism both overthrow, revolution, recreation. The 1,000-year ride of the Nazis being, of course, an exact translation of the millennium that Christians hoped for into a secular register. Rather amusingly and pathetically, we lived, of course, through our own little mini version of this with our much hyped millennium bug, if you can think back to that, a predicted catastrophe for a digital, security-obsessed, late capitalist age. Never really quite came. I think you see this love of sort of apocalyptic, mini-apocalyptic thinking in the way that this notion of disruption has been so happily embraced at the moment and is used as positive in future thinking. Now, for the environmental thinking, we have, of course, a lot of environmental apocalyptic, let's call it. The blueprint is very different from a lot of the old religious ones, but the anticipatory mode is the same. A lot of environmentalism is a version of what Catherine Wessinger, the great scholar of millennialism, calls avertive millennialism. Avertive millennialism. It foretells global catastrophe unless we take dramatic avertive action to usher in a new era of harmonious coexistence within planetary limits, the Gaia era. My second mode of anticipation is divination. One or two people have been talking about divination at this conference. It's the most fascinating, the most understudied, the most unacknowledged form of anticipation in my field, in the study of religion. It's not taken nearly as seriously as it should be, but interest is reviving in classical studies and a few other areas. It's a very unspoken thing in futures thinking. Fortune telling is, I do a lot of empirical research, fortune telling is the way that futures thinking comes to most people today, still, and yet we don't talk about fortune telling. It's a fascinating and actually much more sophisticated, interesting and meaningful and worth researching area than you might imagine. Still today it is. I'm not going to go into divination. It's actually a huge field which needs a lot more theoretical sub-classification than I've got time to do here. But divination in various ways uses culturally established methods, often with a ritual pattern, for discerning patterns in the present in order to act into the future. I'll say that again, that's my definition. It uses culturally established, often ritualized methods for discerning patterns in the present in order to act into the future. It's really about knowledge. Knowledge on which one can act, if one likes. The diviner reads apparently random facets of existence in such a way that they can provide insight. But often the person who's having the work done for them, and of course they range from Roman emperors to very poor people, often have a lot of input in it as well, in deciphering oracular messages, in taking and leaving some of it. The Roman Empire was of course very much based on divination, and it didn't do too badly. So it's not an entirely stupid system, and it has been of interest to people from the most elite to the very poor. It has an amazing range of technologies as well, of course. Tea leaves, sadly, I think, have been pushed out by the tea bag, but you can use other coffee grounds that are actually being used now. As I wrote, very weirdly, as I wrote this little bit on divination, was thinking about it, a bird fell down my chimney. Truly, which has never happened before. And augury, reading birds, what happens to birds is very important.
Entrails.
Say again?
Entrails, yeah.
Entrails are very important, livers particularly, yes. Flames, Game of Thrones, pick that up as well, candles. Most things can speak, but we still use magpies. Final mode of anticipation is no anticipation at all. Let me call it de-anticipation. It's an insight of many religions and cultures that far from being difficult to achieve, anticipation is difficult to solve. We anticipate the whole time. How long will she go on? What am I going to have for tea? Well, the next speaker here goes up. It takes a huge effort to stop that, and there are techniques to help you do it. All religions have them. All religions emphasize anticipation. Take no thought for the morrow, said Jesus, sufficient unto the day are the troubles thereof. Which of you, by taking thought, can add 1 cubit to his stature? Long before Christianity, Indian philosophy developed the idea that our recurrent thought patterns cut channels in the brain, like water wearing down rock. These are the samskaras in Sanskrit. 2,000 years later, we call them neural pathways and think we've made a discovery. Ancient philosophy knew that we prefigure our sense impressions according to our anticipations of other mental habits. Addiction is the extreme example. How absurd, say the Buddhists, to take this as reality and peg our lives to it. The Buddhists insist most forcefully that enlightenment comes by stepping outside your mental clutter and severing attachment to it. A practice in simplified form being revived today as mindfulness. Taoist thought in China takes a somewhat different and more modest, perhaps more realistic approach. We're incapable of existing without illusion. So the aim is to be calm and reflective about your illusions, your cognitions. Sit light to them. Taoism celebrates non-egotistical spontaneity and lightness of touch. It celebrates Wu Wei, not inaction, but action that is so appropriate, so in accord with the nature of things, that the author leaves no trace. This is the inverse of an anthropocentric view of the universe. In the Chuang-Tzu, one of the classic texts of Taoism, there are fantastical passages in which birds and trees and so on teach us what they know. And interestingly, it's to Taoism that John Gray turns, the philosopher John Gray, in his assured of modern progress in favour of a more modest, less striving, world-plundering form of human existence in our age of planetary desolation. So So anthropocentric, sorry. The Anthropocene and anthropocentric, rather confusing. Thinking around the Anthropocene is picking up this non-anticipatory mode as well. And so to conclude, future thinking is about how we control forces that are outside our control. I've talked about 3 ways of doing it that are very widespread and long established, and you can classify them, I think. Once I stood back and thought about this, you can classify them in terms of how much control they think are possible. How much anticipation can we have? So at one extreme, the apocalyptic mode thinks that there can be very, very considerable control. At the other end, probably Buddhist non-attachment thinks least. Divination is probably somewhere in the middle where it has different modes. Thank you very much.
Tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Ko Shonhi Hau, ko whawati te maunga, ko manawatu te awa, ko Ngāti Pākehā te iwi. So that was my mihi, or greeting in Te Reo Māori. I wanted to open with some Māori. I'm from New Zealand, and I wanted to open with some Māori because I'm going to conclude with some of the things I've learned from working with Māori researchers. But actually, the reason I think I've been invited to the panel is to give a perspective of a physical scientist, I'm a physicist, on anticipation and futures. In physical science, we think of systems as evolving towards equilibrium. The end state of a system, the static state or the stable state of the system, is what we call an equilibrium. And systems are either can be in a dynamic equilibrium or can be in a static equilibrium. And what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to get some audience participation to demonstrate this. So I'm going to need some volunteers. I've only got 10 minutes, so please don't be bashful. And ideally, I've heard a few Australian accents around. I'd love an Australian to volunteer, as well as someone from Europe. So we've got any Australians?
There's no pressure there.
No pressure. Someone from New Zealand would be ideal too. Yeah, okay. Would you like to come up? And I need someone from the Northern Hemisphere. So, yep, okay. People aren't usually harmed in this experiment. So what I'd like you to do is I want you to stand over here, right? And when I say go, what I'd like you to do is walk towards each other and just swap places. Okay, so go. Okay, you did that rather well. Give it one more go and just see what happens. Right, now that was really quite interesting, actually, what happened there. I don't know if people were watching closely enough, but what happened is they broke symmetry. Okay, so physics is all about symmetry. And what happened when they passed each other is they kind of had to break symmetry, right? The only other choice was to walk straight into each other. And so the first time you did it, you crossed on each other's left, walked to the left of the other. The second time you did it, you walked on the right. So actually, on average, you keep the symmetry of the system. Now, what's this got to do with physics? Well, as I said, physics is all about symmetry. And when systems change phases or change state, there's often a change in just dropped your oyster card there. You lose that. There's often a change in symmetry as that occurs, right? And what's really interesting about pedestrians is when people are walking towards each other, we have to break symmetry, we make collective choices about that. So actually, in New Zealand and Australia, we tend to pass on the left. So you New Zealand or Australia? New Zealand, okay. So it went the New Zealanders way the first time. Yeah, you actually, you had to put that, And then the second time you did it the way that you do here in the UK or in Europe, which is pass on the right. Right, so that's an example of broken symmetry. And what's interesting about it is it's broken differently in different parts of the world, right? In different parts of the world, we've made different collective choices about how we break that symmetry. And what you were doing is you were anticipating right? So here's my link to anticipation. I did have to work at this as a physicist. You're anticipating what each other was going to do. You were watching each other, but actually, normally what happens is we just consciously develop or subconsciously develop an understanding of what the people around us are going to do, and we break symmetry in the way that others do in our own local environment. And so that's actually an emergent phenomenon, right? So in physics, we would call that a phase transition, right? In other disciplines, we refer to that as emergent. And there's a couple of consequences of that. Well, first of all, one is that it's actually not possible, by looking at you individually, right, without getting you to interact with someone else, I can't tell which way you're going to break symmetry, right? We actually had to do the experiment to find that out. Right, so that's what kind of defeats the constructionist position on science. Right, we can't start from a theory of fundamental particles and go right up to social science and predict which way you're going to pass each other. Right, now I'll get you to sit down now. Thanks for participating. Normally I don't do this example in an environment where I've got New Zealanders and or Australians and people from Europe, so it was great to do that experiment. Okay, I want to talk about another idea that physicists use to try and understand the world and to understand futures. And this also involves symmetry, right? And this is the Copernican principle. And the symmetry in the Copernican principle is that you are not special, right? Copernicus used that to change his mindset about whether the Earth revolved around the Sun or the Sun revolved around the Earth. By realising that there's nothing special about the Earth, he was able to reframe his model and come to understand that the Earth was actually orbiting about the Sun. And so the Copernican principle can be used in a number of different ways. One of the ways that it's used to think about the future leads to Brandon Carter's doomsday argument. So I don't know if people have come across this argument before. It's been debated a lot in philosophy, but it's quite an interesting way to try and view the future. So you start with the proposition that you're not special as an individual. Right? Therefore, you could have been born at any time in the lifetime of our species. Right? There's nothing particular about that, particularly special about you. You could have been born at any point in time. And so actually, you're most likely to have been born in the middle period of our species. Right? Not right at the start, that would make you special. Not right at the end, that would make you special. And this actually lets you, based on how many people we think have lived, and the length, the duration of our species so far, this lets us estimate the lifetime of our species. And I don't know if people have heard this estimate, but we've got about another 10,000 years to go based on that argument. And it's very interesting. I mean, so that's kind of an epistemological tool that we're not special, but it is something that is quite deeply embedded in the way we do physics and the way we think about the world. And actually, you can link this to one of the norms, Robert Merton's norms of science, right? But it's not who says it, it's not who puts up the proposition that's important, it's what is said, right? And that's very deeply embedded in the way we do physics. And actually, it's a bit of a trap in some ways, and physical scientists fall into this trap. Even if you don't think that this is actually how science works, and there's now plenty of empirical evidence that it does matter who you are when you say something in science, when we like to hope that in the long run, these things get worked out, right? But certainly in the short term, we can see those impacts. But this belief in universalism, really obscures the privilege that physicists might have. And in particular, I fit the stereotype of a physicist. I'm a white male. And for me to use this argument actually overlooks the fact that I have a lot of privilege, right? So in some sense, who I am breaks symmetry and affects the way that I view the future. And it's a common fallacy, I think, in the way we do physical sciences, that we don't understand the privilege that we have. So I just wanted to finish with a little reflection on the Maori worldview, or Te Ao Māori. And I work a little bit with Maori research, and it's been very interesting learning some aspects of that worldview. And I'm still very much a learner, so I'm not speaking from a position of expertise here. But the Maori worldview is really a lot about interconnectedness. They don't make this distinction between humans and the environment. Right? It's very much interconnected. In fact, they see themselves that the environment is very much ancestral. Right? So they came from the environment, and so they will actually include descriptions of the environment in their whakapapa or in their ancestry. And in fact, when I gave you my mihi at the start, I talked about the mountain under which I grew up and the river beside which I was born. And that's part of my whakapapa. That's part of explaining who I am, is talking about the environment as part of my ancestry. And so this has had implications for how we deal with the future in New Zealand. New Zealand's a very interesting country to live in, where we sort of have this fusion of European way of doing things, as well as aspects that we're starting to adopt from the Maori worldview. And there's a concept in Te Ao Māori called kaitiakitanga, which translates as guardianship. Right? So they don't really have a concept of ownership; they have a concept known as guardianship. And this has been worked out through our courts recently through the Whanganui River, or Te Awa Tupava. And actually this river has been given legal rights as a person. And so which is just, it's a very interesting concept on its own, but then there's also practical consequences. And so actually the local iwi or Māori tribe have actually been given guardianship of those rights. And so once you set that up, that starts to change how you think about the future. You become guardians of your environment, and that's going to play out, I think, in a very interesting way in New Zealand over the next few decades. And so I think, just in conclusion, I think physical scientists, we're not supposed to see ourselves in our models. We're taking ourselves out of our models, right? That's a powerful epistemological tool, but there are also downsides to how we do that. Thank you.
Is there any way you can get the microphone to this one?
I think this is too short.
Should we have a test? Can you shout from back?
Let me know. Can you hear me? I think. Perfect. I'm speaking here from the field of design practice and curatorial practice, and it might seem, with regard to subjects like physics and religion, a rather small and less essential discipline to cover. However, in the context of the Anthropocene, we have questioned our long-held concept of nature being knowledge of the interdependence with other beings, and of course understand our world as man-made, with all its effects and consequences. The latter, of course, is our deepest concerns and urgent focus, from extreme weather to submerging cities, acute resource shortages, vanished species, nuclear fallout, etc., and addresses a world designed by man, and man in its application of design is responsible for these recent and not so recent transformations of the earth. This design practice does not only include consumer projects, but structures, systems, ideas, and thinking. Only in the 1990s, a small group of designers started turning their attention away from providing solutions in objects, but engaging with the effects and consequences their objects had, in particular in the highly celebrated field of technology. The interest was first and foremost to develop a critical attitude to their own discipline, but was driven solely by the claim of constant interest that their own discipline, that was driven solely by the claim of a constant demand for more and better objects in the name of innovation and creativity. Leading this new approach, where the design duo Fiona Raby and Anthony Dunn dramatically shifted the focus of the conventional design discipline by taking the effects and consequences of technology not only in consideration in the design process, but as its starting point. The work developed by themselves and their students in the Design Interactions Department at the Royal College of the Arts between 2005 and 2015 needed to develop a radically new form to be understood as critical inquiry, which is indicated in the shift of terminology from product or object to props, which in their own words, they said, help us think about alternative possibilities. They challenge ideas, values, and beliefs of our society embodied in material culture. Inspired by activism, cautionary tales, conceptual design, contestable futures, design fiction, interrogative design, radical design, satire, and design fiction, Dan has coined the term critical design in the late 1990s, but the awareness of an increasing attention towards the future led him to introduce the term speculative design about 5 years ago to strengthen the idea to propose, offer, or suggest alternative ways of thinking and imagining the future, taking into account the variety of options we have at each stage. In their definition, they say, in their definition of speculative design, they say it's about meaning and culture, about adding to what life could be, challenging what it is, and providing alternatives that loosen the ties, realities, and our ability to dream. In addition to critical and speculative design, we have seen a number of new areas of design practice developing in recent years, addressing this shift away from serving a consumer culture to dealing with its dramatic effects. The expansion of the design field needs to be read as a result of anticipation, which seems to me as its prime times in periods of transformation. And we have seen this recently with the change into a digitally and globally networked turn of the century. We have seen this before in the 20th century a number of times. However, the big change is that we have learned recently that it's not anymore about raising awareness in what we are doing in the curatorial practice, but it's about instrumentally thinking about change and how we can kind of how we can agitate that. The response in the curatorial field, of course, in terms of transformation, is first and foremost always or was a mass of exhibitions and research projects about futures. They dedicated themselves to, in the first instance, to share this uncanny feeling about being present at the birth of an extreme age, which complexity and the complicated nature of possible solutions overwhelmed us. So they wanted to help with this, but it needs to be more. Supported by the expanded fields of design practice mentioned earlier, exhibitions have started to engage their audiences on a different level. So in contrast to historic periods of heightened attention and anticipation, and supported by a transformed network of media, curators realize that their intention does not have to be anymore solely in raising awareness, as I said, of issues and relations, but the engagement of these audiences into debates and discussions that cause a disruption of ignorance, a transformation of thinking, and ideally the implementation of change. This shift in intention was encouraged by the intention curatorial formats as it's gained from circles outside of the context of museums, galleries, and archives, because of their ability to attract and communicate with wider audiences. And that seems to be a really important point that has kind of stimulated a little bit of thinking recently, but needs to kind of engage far more. The reach and focus on audiences, whether it's selected or not, is understood as an incredible value at a time where information is spread and shared across the globe, but we can hardly control who is reached and to what effect. But also it does something else which seems to be even more important. The collective experience of interaction in the physical space, however, seems to provide a context that slows us down, stimulates engagement, and activates exchange, and probably also an openness towards thinking the different, the other. With regard to the unforeseen, it allows us to share both our culpability and also our fragility as humans, but it might even challenge the uncomfortable and helpless feeling that suggests that our individual acts may be statistically and morally insignificant, but when you multiply them millions and billions of times, as they are performed by entire species, they are a collective act of ecological deconstruction. So emergencies seem to be easier understood when surrounded by others. The last point I want to make is dedicated to the expansion of our curatorial practice itself and its methods. Museums and galleries have been recognized as alternative public spaces of experimentation, but equally, curatorial methods can be applied by independent bodies and organizations in the most diverse public spaces that can serve different types of audiences. We have seen the reanimation of abandoned sites, the reclaim of public spaces, the infiltration and re-infiltration of existing institutions. The complexity of the Anthropocene demands radical experimentation and transdisciplinary working, for which our context of academic institutions and research centers might not always provide the ideal context for. And I very welcome the very interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary nature of this conference, but also of our panel, which is, I have to say, at least, for myself, rather unusual. And it was really nice to kind of see a discomfort and slight feeling of being overwhelmed by seeing what the other speakers are talking about and thinking about how much do I understand what they understand, what they are saying, and how much can we speak to each other. However, I want to really kind of make a plea to kind of try to simulate more of these situations where these encounters are possible. If we're growing understanding that the Anthropocene is forcing a revolution in human thought, then we have to engage outside of our own field, but also open discussions to larger groups of society. And I think that is something that the curatorial field, where the curatorial practice is really instrumental. A diverse range of curatorial formats, from exhibitions, installations, interventions, to debates, games, and even dinners, allow for diverse audiences whose randomness is valuable in its unexpected convergence of unrelated people who might be inspired to then think the unthinkable. Thank you.